there's magic in simplicity. A rainy night, a good story, and a warm voice. That's all you need. Before we begin, click like if this is your kind of calm, and subscribe for more sleepy escapes. Do you remember the last bedtime story someone read to you? There's a sound to summer evenings that doesn't exist anywhere else. It's not one sound, really, but a layering distant laughter, the soft clink of plates being washed behind an open window, the whirring wings of insects tracing slow circles through warm air. Even now, years later, I can hear it if I sit still enough. If the day has been long and the light begins to soften, that old rhythm returns, low and familiar. Back then, our neighborhood slowed down after 5. The sun would dip just enough to paint everything gold, the sidewalks, the gates, even the plastic chairs left outside from lunch. Shadows lengthened. Doors opened. People drifted from their homes like petals caught in a breeze. My parents always seemed more relaxed in that hour. My father would sit on the steps with a newspaper he never quite finished. My mother moved slower in the kitchen, humming something without a tune, the sound of pots clinking softly in time with her footsteps. And I would be outside barefoot more often than not, toes gray with dust, shirt sticking slightly to my back from the leftover heat of the day. There was a boy named Jovan who lived 3 houses down. We weren't best friends, not in the way kids sometimes are, but we understood each other in that unspoken way children do when they grow up on the same street. We didn't talk much. We just moved through the evening like it belonged to us, kicking a ball, chasing shadows, lying on the still warm pavement, and pointing at clouds that were already losing their shape. Sometimes his sister would bring us water with lemon in cloudy glasses, the ice already half melted. We'd sit by the curb, sipping slowly, letting our arms rest on our knees, quiet, not bored, just content. Around us, the neighborhood shifted into its evening self, softer, slower. Radios hummed from balconies. A dog barked once, lazily. Somewhere far off, someone was grilling, the smell drifting like a memory through the hedges. It was in those moments, I think, that I first started to feel something I didn't have a name for. A kind of ache that wasn't sad, just deep. Like the day was folding into something quieter and I was folding with it. Not disappearing, just becoming smaller, more still, as the world changed color around me. I didn't understand it at the time. I just knew I liked that hour. It felt safe, held, like everything could wait until morning. Sometimes my mother would call my name from the kitchen window, her voice soft but clear. 5 more minutes, I'd call back, and those 5 minutes would stretch like taffy, endless in their smallness. And even when they ended, even when I walked back into the house with the last light clinging to my shoulders, I carried something with me, a hush, a warmth, a secret rhythm that still beats in me today. I think if you were to listen closely enough to your own evenings, you'd hear it too. That gentle music the world makes when it starts to rest. It's still there, waiting. The house next to ours had a garden that never seemed to sleep. Even on the hottest days, when every other yard looked parched and faded, theirs stayed impossibly green thick with tall tomato vines, basil in clay pots, and sunflowers that turned their heads to follow the sky. It belonged to an older couple I didn't know very well. He was always in a hat, she always in an apron. They spoke quietly between themselves, in that low, continuous rhythm of people who've shared 1,000 days together and no longer need to explain things. I rarely saw them in the middle of the day, just the occasional glimpse through the slats in the fence. But in the evenings, as the light softened and the air cooled, they would come out like everything else in the neighborhood. She would water the plants slowly, the hose arcing like a loose ribbon across the stems, and he would sit on a stool, cleaning his nails with a small knife or cutting herbs with careful fingers. I used to sit on the edge of our porch just to watch, not to spy, not even really to observe, just to be near that quiet. There was something deeply calming about their routine. Nothing ever hurried. Nothing ever forgotten. The same way every evening seemed to last a little longer when you paid attention. Once the man caught my eye through the fence and lifted a hand. Not a wave, just an open palm. I nodded back. We didn't speak. But the silence between us felt good, balanced, as if we both understood that something important was happening, and it didn't require words. That evening, I remember, the sky had turned the color of peach skin, that soft, bruised orange with a touch of pink at the edges. The kind of color that only shows up once the day is too tired to shine and is just learning how to rest. Their garden seemed to glow in it. The green looked deeper. The tomatoes looked like lanterns. And I thought, for the first time, this won't always be here. Not the couple, not the fence, not even this air. I didn't know what that meant exactly, but I felt it, that small ache behind the ribs that tells you something is beautiful because it won't last forever. I went inside just after that. The hall was cool, the smell of my mother's cooking floating up through the floor. I washed my hands without being told, the warm water making my skin feel new again, and I sat at the table with the quietness of that garden still inside me. My father poured water from a pitcher, and the sound it made, soft, round, steady, reminded me of the woman's watering can. My mother set down plates, and I looked at her hands, remembering the way the man next door had clipped rosemary from his bush. Life was repeating itself, I realized, in different ways, through different people, but the rhythm was the same. Care, quiet, light. The way evenings ask nothing of you but presence. I still think of that garden sometimes, though I don't remember the couple's names. Maybe I never knew them. But I remember the way their world slowed down the whole street. The way their sunflowers leaned like they were listening. The way their quiet became part of mine. And to this day, when I pass a garden lit by evening light, I stop, just for a moment, just long enough to feel how full stillness can be. After dinner, the street would begin to settle. Not sleep, not yet, but soften, like fabric laid flat after a day of wear. The sun had slipped behind the buildings by then, leaving only the blue hush of dusk in its place. You could feel the shift in the way the air cooled just enough to make your skin alert, in the way the world stopped doing and started listening. That was my favorite time. I didn't always go back outside. Sometimes I'd just sit near the window, elbows resting on the sill, listening to the street breathe. We lived in a small building, 3 floors, 6 apartments, and by that hour, the other homes were full of quiet rituals. Plates being rinsed, chairs scooted back, someone sweeping the balcony with slow, even strokes. But what I remember most are the voices. Not conversations I was part of. Just sound, soft laughter drifting from the neighbor's window. A grandmother speaking gently to someone in another room. A man's low voice on the telephone. Words slow and tired. There was something deeply reassuring about it. Like a lullaby made from other people's lives. I didn't have to know what they were saying. It was enough to know they were there, all these people, finishing their day in their own private way, their sound spilling into the open like warmth from a candle. Occasionally, someone would play music never loudly, just a quiet hum of a song from decades ago, something with strings or an old piano. My father used to hum along sometimes, not realizing he was doing it. He'd sit with his book by the lamp, glasses low on his nose, and tap his fingers softly on the armrest. My mother would bring tea, always chamomile at that hour, and I'd smell the faint sweetness of honey before she even stepped into the room. We didn't speak much in those evenings. There wasn't a need. The silence was never heavy. It was comfortable, familiar. Like the kind of silence that happens between people who trust each other to just exist side by side. And beyond our windows, the world whispered. A moped passing slowly over wet asphalt. Someone lighting a cigarette and coughing softly on their balcony. The far-off call of a dog, answered by another. The clink of cutlery being dried and stacked. These were the lullabies of my childhood, not sung, not played, just lived. Quiet sounds that wrapped around the night and made it safe. Sometimes I'd rest my head against the cool glass of the window and close my eyes, not to sleep, just to listen better, to feel part of something bigger than myself, not loud, not flashing, not dramatic. Just present. And even now, all these years later, I still find that kind of quiet when I need it most. I'll sit with the lights low, a warm drink in hand, and open a window, even if it's only a little, just to hear the world going on. To remind myself that I don't need to fill every moment, that being near others, even in silence, is its own kind of closeness. Its own kind of love. I didn't know it was the last evening of that summer. No one ever tells you those things, not even the sky, though sometimes I think it tries. The air was a little cooler than usual. The light fell just a little faster. The sun didn't linger on the windows quite the same way. It wasn't dramatic, no gust of wind. No sudden goodbye, just a quiet shift, like the world exhaling a breath it had been holding since June. Everything looked the same. The gardens, the sidewalks, the fences, chipped in the same corners. Jovan was still out front, kicking a ball in lazy circles with his shoe, and his sister sat nearby with a book on her knees, not really reading. My mother's voice still floated from the kitchen window, asking if I was hungry. The old couple next door were watering their garden like always, moving slowly between the vines. But even in all that sameness, I felt something I hadn't before, a kind of weight to the moment, like it was holding still just a second too long. We didn't talk about school starting, not yet. But it was there in the stiffness of new notebooks stacked on the hallway table, in the smell of fresh pencils, in the way adults started saying things like soon and next week. Even the birds sounded different, thinner somehow. And as I sat on the curb that night, arms wrapped around my knees, I remember watching the street lamps flicker on, not in surprise this time, but in recognition. Like they were saying, Yes, we're back now. Summer's going. The garden next door had already lost some of its boldness. The basil was leggy, the tomatoes a little overripe. I could hear the couple's voices, soft as always, but they weren't speaking much now. Just small phrases, a nod, a hum. They didn't need to fill the silence. Maybe they felt the shift too. At one point, Jovan sat down next to me. He didn't say anything, just nudged my shoulder gently with his and looked out toward the end of the street. It was empty, the kind of empty that feels like a question. They fixed the crack in the sidewalk, he said after a while. I looked over. He was right. The little jagged line where weeds used to grow was gone. I'd never noticed it being fixed. Huh, I said. That was it. That's all we said. But we both understood what it meant. The world was changing in small, quiet ways, and we were starting to notice. I stayed out a little longer than usual that night. My mom didn't call me in right away. Maybe she too felt something in the air and didn't want to break it. The sky turned deep blue, and the stars began to prick through, faint and blinking, like they were still deciding if they wanted to be seen. The warm scent of laundry, still drying on someone's balcony, floated past me. I listened not for anything in particular, just because the street had something to say. That evening stayed with me, not because anything happened, but because something ended, quietly, kindly, as if the summer had folded itself up like a blanket and placed itself gently in a drawer. Even now, I sometimes feel that same shift, at the edge of a day, in the tone of the sky, in the way a breeze moves through a space. And I remember how, once, I learned to say goodbye without being told to. I learned what it means to feel a season leave you, and to let it go not with sadness, but with thanks. The first morning of autumn always arrived without knocking. It didn't matter what the calendar said. The season revealed itself not with dates, but with a feeling. That morning I remember stepping outside barefoot like I always did, and the tiles beneath my feet were cold for the first time in months. Not sharp, not winter cold, just enough to make me pause. The sky was a little paler, the sun not quite as eager. I could smell something new in the air, damp leaves maybe, or the faint bitterness of dust being lifted by wind. And just like that, the street I thought I knew began to change its face. The trees that lined the sidewalk still looked full, but a few yellow leaves clung awkwardly to the hedges, like they'd fallen early and didn't know where to go. The sounds were different, too quieter, more held. No more sharp laughter echoing off pavement, no more bouncing balls or late-night radio music drifting from open windows. Doors closed sooner now. Curtains were drawn earlier. The neighborhood folded inward, just a little. And yet, it wasn't sad. It was necessary, natural. Like even the street knew it couldn't stay summer forever. I remember walking with my mother to the corner shop that morning, and how the light slanted across the ground at a different angle. People wore sweaters now, light jackets. The woman at the bakery had her hair wrapped in a scarf I hadn't seen since spring. Everything familiar had shifted just enough to make you notice. On the way back, I asked my mother if we would still have dinners outside. She smiled and said, "Maybe one or two more, then we'll move in." It was such a simple answer, but I felt something in my chest when she said it. The understanding that life doesn't stop. It just moves inward for a while. That night, I watched the street through the window again. The garden next door was tidier now, the man having trimmed everything down to its roots. Jovan's front yard was empty. No bikes, no scattered shoes, just stillness. I imagined everyone tucked inside, their homes glowing softly from within. It comforted me, that image, that even though I couldn't see them, the people I'd spent the summer with were still there, just behind walls and windows, breathing the same cooler air, adjusting to the change in pace. And I realized something else. Sitting there with my knees drawn to my chest and a blanket over my shoulders, I wasn't losing anything. I was carrying it, all of it. The warm nights, the voices through the windows, the smell of tomatoes in the sun, the way the light lingered just a little longer when no one was watching it was still with me, even now, even in the quiet. Maybe especially in the quiet. And maybe that's what growing up is, in its gentlest form. Learning that some parts of life don't disappear when they're over. They settle inside you, quietly, and wait for you to notice them again. I didn't plan to go back. Not really. It just happened one late afternoon when I was passing through the city on my way somewhere else, and I realized I had an extra hour with nothing to do, no one waiting for me, and the kind of soft light in the sky that made everything feel like it could be remembered. I parked on a street nearby, one I didn't recognize, and walked the last few blocks by instinct more than memory. At first, I wasn't sure if I was in the right place. The trees were taller now, their roots cracking through the sidewalk in quiet protest, and the paint on the buildings had changed, updated, softened by time, or covered over in newer shades. But then I saw it the shape of our old building, familiar not because it looked the same, but because it felt the same. The low fence, the uneven gate, the third-floor balcony with chipped plaster on the edge, and just like that, I was back not in time, not really, but in something just as real. A sense, a sound, a thread pulling gently from somewhere deep in me. I didn't go in, of course. Someone else lived there now. Curtains drawn, a different plant on the windowsill, but I stood across the street and watched, letting the moment unfold. The air smelled different, less of dust and tomatoes, more of car exhaust and nearby coffee shops, but underneath it I swore I could still catch it, that warm, slow scent of evening. The street felt quieter than I remembered. Fewer kids, more silence. But it wasn't a lonely kind of silence. It was mature, settled, the kind that accepts change without complaint. I sat on a bench that hadn't been there before, tracing my gaze along the sidewalks where we used to race barefoot. My mind flickering with images I hadn't summoned in years. Jovan's striped shirt, the garden next door, my mother's voice calling softly through the window. And I realized something strange, but comforting. The place hadn't held on to me, but I had held on to it. Not in a way that clung or mourned, just quietly, steadily, the way roots hold earth long after the rain has passed. I stayed only a few minutes, long enough to feel what I needed to feel. Then I stood, stretched my legs, and walked back the way I came, slower than before. Not because I was reluctant to leave, but because I wanted to carry the rhythm with me a little longer. And as I reached the corner, I heard the soft sound of someone's radio playing from a window above. an old song I didn't know the name of, and I smiled, not because it reminded me of something, but because it didn't have to. It was enough to know that somewhere life was still humming quietly along, and that the sounds of summer evenings, once lived, never fully go away. I never set out to recreate it, not deliberately, at least, but sometimes in the evenings, when the house is quiet and the light softens across the floorboards just so, I realize that the life I've built carries the same tempo as those childhood summers, slow and careful, like something remembered through the body more than the mind. I find it in the way I put the kettle on without rushing, in how I open the windows not for air but for presence, letting the world breathe in, even if only for a moment, the way I light the lamp before it's needed, because that's when the glow is gentlest. I live in a different city now, in a quiet apartment that sits above a side street where bicycles pass more often than cars. And while it's not the neighborhood I grew up in, something about it knows how to hold silence. Not the lonely kind, but the kind that wraps around you like an old cardigan, warm at the edges and full of small comforts. On some evenings, I hear my neighbors through the walls, low conversations, laughter muffled by the softness of rooms, a chair scraping across tile, and instead of feeling intruded upon, I feel soothed. Their sounds remind me that I'm not alone, that the world is happening in small, private ways all around me, the way it always has. I think we carry those early sounds with us, not the exact voices or phrases, but the feeling of being surrounded by life that expected nothing from us but attention. That's how I try to live now. I keep plants near the window, though I'm not as skilled at caring for them as the old couple next door once were. I fold my towels neatly, the way my mother did, and keep a drawer for things I don't need, but can't throw away, not because they're useful, but because they hold something of the days that shaped me. And sometimes, when the evening feels just right, I'll sit with a cup of tea by the open window and say nothing for a long while, letting the sounds rise and fall around me, footsteps, distant music, the rustle of wind in the trees, all of it carrying the echo of a summer that lives not behind me, but within me. I don't try to capture it. I don't need to. It finds me on its own, in the way the light falls, in the scent of warm air through a screen, in the rhythm of silence I no longer rush to fill. And in those moments, I feel that I am not just remembering, I am continuing. I am adding to the quiet lineage of people who knew how to end a day slowly, with presence, with peace, with something close to love. I think what stays with us in the end isn't the big memories, not birthdays, not vacations, not the days when everything was loud and full, but the quiet hours, the ones that felt ordinary while they were happening, the evenings where nothing special was planned, but somehow everything felt whole, like the world had finally stopped long enough for you to notice your place in it. I don't remember what day of the week it was, or how long that summer lasted, or when exactly it gave way to fall, but I remember how the light used to settle across the walls of our old apartment, golden and soft, turning even chipped paint into something sacred. I remember the sound of cutlery in the sink, the way my mother used to sigh gently as she wiped down the table, how my father always paused between turning the pages of his book like he was giving the evening a moment to breathe. I remember the smell of warm fabric and tomato stems, the hum of a distant radio playing a song no one quite knew the name of, the faint tapping of moths against the screen as night crept in slowly, asking permission before it arrived. These things have stayed with me, not as snapshots, but as textures, as atmosphere. They're stitched into the way I move through my own days now, into the way I notice things that don't ask to be noticed. The way sunlight rests on the floor at 5 p.m., the hush in the air just before it rains, the comfort of hearing someone nearby moving quietly in another room. And maybe that's the quiet truth we come to understand as we grow, that the people who raised us, the streets we played on, the walls that once echoed with our footsteps, they don't disappear. They fold into us, like music we've memorized without meaning to. They become the reason we slow down in the evening, the reason we light a room with intention, the reason we still feel safe when we hear a voice drift through an open window. These summers, they never really ended. They just changed form, became part of how we breathe, how we care, how we sit with ourselves when the world asks us to be still. And so when someone asks me what it was like, the place I came from, the childhood I carry, I don't always know what to say. But if they ever sat beside me on a quiet evening, with the window cracked open, the light low, and the sound of a distant conversation floating through the air, I think they'd understand, without a word. They'd feel it too, the hush of something loved, still here, still glowing softly inside the dark.